There I was called to mind the great difference of the luscious grass that we used to camp on, which are now dusty plains.
Welcome back to your favorite series, Homesteading Through History. And if it's not your favorite series yet, it's because this is episode 1, Homesteading Through History. Yeah. For thousands of years, people have been raising animals and growing food, and there's so much that we can learn from them, both what to do and what not to do. And in today's video, we're gonna be going over an interview that happened in 1940 from a man who lived during the 1860s, or traveled west throughout the 1860s and saw the landscape change as he photographed the expansion of the railroad during those key pivotal moments of the U.S. history when the Homesteaders Act of 1862 was implemented, really encouraging people to move west. They didn't have electricity, they didn't have water, they didn't have the amenities of today. So learning from them is very crucial to being self-sufficient today. Now, instead of me introducing him, let's let this interview start.
This morning on a coast-to-coast broadcast of the Mutual Broadcasting System, it is our pleasure to pay a tribute to a gentleman who's sitting at our microphones here now in the Department of the Interior building. I'd like to repeat again that tribute before we start this little discussion, Mr. Jackson. We said this morning, one of America's grand old men has a birthday this week. He will be 98 years old Friday. Think of that, lacking only 2 years of being a century old. I think it's safe to say that no one in the world living today has looked upon the things this man has seen. No man will ever see them again, for William Henry Jackson is part and parcel of America's Old West. It was 75 years ago, way back in 1866, that he worked his way west on the Oregon Trail as a bullwhacker. He was the first man who ever took pictures in the Yellowstone country. With his camera and with his able brush, he has photographed and painted a record of our early West that would not exist otherwise. He went as a bullwhacker with the Mormons to Salt Lake. He was with a mule freight outfit that lugged stuff over the mountains to a little village called Los Angeles. He rode herd on Mustangs around another little village called Omaha. Because this man had the eye of an artist and the instinct of a historian, we have a better understanding today of the beginning of our great West. Much of the development of the West was aided by his work. A magnificent and full life you've had, William Henry Jackson, and here's thanks and the nation's best wishes to you on your 98th birthday. That was in the broadcast this morning. And now we're very happy, Mr. Jackson, that you're here with us now and can tell us in your own words some of these things that I know you would like to have us know.
So before we get into it, I just think about my grandfather at the beginning of this, because all he ever wanted to be was a cowboy, and something I grew up, always wore cowboy boots, always wore hats. But the funny thing is, my grandfather was 100% Italian, and actually born pretty close to when this interview happened. So it's really cool to hear this and think about my grandfather and those old cowboy days. Let's go on.
Well, on your last trip across the West, did you notice any changes in the character and the vigor of the grass from that which you observed in the 70s?
So this is really interesting as the very first question that we get from the interviewer. It's about the soil health right in the beginning. Very first question, what was the soil health like as you traveled west? And just for some historical context, this is 1940s that this interview took place. 1930 to 1937-ish, the Great Dust Bowl was happening, caused by a bunch of factors. One of them is, we're going to discuss that in the future part. It's a future part of this interview. But the main one that I think was tilling, as they tilled the land. Because during the Great Depression, there was a high demand for bread and wheat, and so much wheat was being produced and so much tillage happened, it caused a very big lack of topsoil, tons of erosion, and then the great dust pillowing through the sky and the Great Dust Bowl. So just really interesting. It's literally the very first question that he gets here is, what was the soil health like? Right up our alley in homesteading.
Well, that's been called to my attention lately by modern pictures that people have sent me from the Conservation Society. There I was called to mind the great difference of the luscious grass that we used to camp on, which are now dusty plains.
So, this is my second time listening to this, and I didn't catch that the first time. He didn't actually see these dusty plains. He's getting pictures from conservationists which are showing him these big dusty plains, but what he remembers from traveling through it was these big lush grasslands that he used to camp on. And that's one of the biggest attentions I was going to draw in this video, was what those big great plains were like while he was traveling west, before tillage and other stuff started to happen.
Some parts of the middle western Wyoming.
Well, do you remember how the cowboys handled their trail herds in the great cattle drives between Texas and Montana?
I'm now engaged in painting a picture covering that very subject, showing the big drive of the old Longhorn period up across the old Chisholm Trail into Wyoming.
That's as you remember it.
Yeah. I only crossed the trail. I didn't follow it.
I see. Now, just when did sheep begin to compete seriously with cattle?
Oh, along the late 80s and 90s.
And you were a part of all those differences of opinion that took place at that time.
So this is something really interesting that I didn't really think about before watching this video. There was a huge shift in the market from cattle to sheep. And this could be for a bunch of different reasons. So as they're moving west, it's a little bit easier to move the sheep than it is to move some cows. On average, the weight of a cow, it really depends on the type of cow, the type of sheep, but it could be about 5 sheep per 1 cow. And then the grow out rate for when you slaughter a sheep is shorter than the 1.5 to 2 years that it could be depending on the type of cow. Not only that, a cow, its gestation is 10 months. Generally, you're getting 1 cow a year you're getting 1 calf a year from that cow. Sheep, on the other hand, have a 5-month gestation, and they can have twins to triplets. So then your replacement rate is a lot higher. So it makes sense that at that time, they may be switching from cattle to sheep. But not only is it because of their replacement rate, because of their gestation, but also because so many people at that time started using wool for hats, for clothing. And so it was food, clothing, and also a lot of people were getting milk from sheep at the same time. So they had a dual purpose, if not tri-purpose. And for cows, they were just getting meat. Yes, they were getting leather, but at this time, wool was a lot more popular for clothing. Plus, it was way warmer.
More in that country before the cowboy came in even. I like to think of that period before the cowboy period. The cowboys began to come in during the 70s. And they had the full sway for the next 10 years. And then they began to compete with the homesteaders and the cowboys.
Now, did you actually...
So this time, he says about 1970s. Remember, the Homesteaders Act, 1962. So from about that time, 1960 to 1970, you have mainly homesteaders moving out there. Then you get a bunch of the cattlemen moving out there, because that's how he's differentiating it. That it was around the 1870s that the cattlemen moved in, and then there was sort of these range wars that were happening. Sometimes they can still happen today. And a lot of that was over land rights, water rights, actual property lines, and it's funny enough, certain things like that still happen today.
Did you see any of these old range wars that took place?
No, I never. The Johnson County War, as they call it, in Wyoming, that country, was a little bit out of my territory. We were up in the mountains more. My work with the Geological Survey was almost entirely in the mountains, and that's what's on the plains. Where all that warfare occurred.
You've seen lots of buffalo, I expect.
Oh, millions of them.
Would you like to tell us about what those herds looked like when you saw
them? Oh, a
them?
great mass of dark brown animals moving, grazing across the plains. When I first saw a great herd, it was the first year the Kansas Pacific ran across the plains, and we ran through them all day long, passing through buffalo. I had to stop the train to get them off the track. They stopped several times. They were as far as you could see in the distance on those flat plains. In the extreme distance, you could still see them moving on.
You mean this was just one herd that took the entire day for the train?
Well, they were all, it wasn't a herd really, it's the whole mass of buffalo. One great mass of them all came together, not in different herds, but one great movement covering miles of territory.
Would you estimate how many might be in such a...
Oh, very impossible to guess. Some people call it millions, but that's rather excessive.
He said that there were debatable that the amount of buffalo that were around these Great Plains were in the millions. So we had a few different things at that time. We had these great buffalo that were roaming the land in the large herds, so big that he says that they were as far as the eye can see. And these aren't just flat plains, there's bumpiness and ridges. Like, you can really see as far, it's just far off into the distance, in the millions. Trains would be stopped by them. There's so many buffalo out there. And they're eating these grasses, then they'd move on to the next place, and it could be another 6 months to a year before they're back to this original spot. But without those great buffalo going through those herds, stomping the grounds, peeing, pooping, adding more nitrogen, adding more nutrients into the soil, keeping that soil intact, keeping the big roots down deep into the soil, without them, and then including all of the tilling, this caused irreparable damage throughout the Great Plains. It's places there's places in Africa today that are big deserts, and they're fighting against desertification. And one way that they do fight about that is by getting animals, grazing them heavy and dense in a field that they're moving them through, and really trying to revitalize the land and turn that desert into a lush, green pasture land again by increasing topsoil. And one of the best ways that they're doing this with topsoil is by grazing the animals and feeding them in these areas. And then you see them change very quickly and good from these just deserts to lush, green, perfect pastures. And this is one of the lessons that we can learn from history for this one is it's okay to graze your animals. And it's all right to have these animals on the land if you're grazing them properly and rotating them. And without tilling, because the tilling is what rips up all those deep-rooted roots. Because it's tilling that will pull up or has pulled up those ancient roots, ripped them all up, increased erosion because now the roots aren't holding it together anymore. And then you have tons of loss, no topsoil, and tons of erosion. And this is really a problem. And we see it in the 1940s. They're really struggling with it because they got rid of the buffalo and they started tilling.
Did you see the hunting of the buffalo?
Oh, thousands.
How did they hunt the buffalo then? How did they hunt the buffalo?
Oh, just by horseback and chasing. Brother was running up onto them. The old Indian with a spear and bow and arrow, and our modern people with their guns. I myself ran down several buffalo using only a revolver, riding up close to them and firing on their left flank.
Another interesting thing here. It seems like the buffalo, I'm going to give a little bit away. He says that game was really shy here in the mountains, and they would have to hire special trained hunters just to go find the game because he called them shy. That's in contrast to what he says here about the buffalo. The buffalo weren't shy. The buffalo seemed calm because the Indians could just go up and get them with a spear, or you could just go up and get them with a revolver. I couldn't imagine hunting too much with a revolver today, even though the animals are less shy. This is just a very interesting thing to see that the great big bison were not afraid, while the other animals didn't have a lot of experience with humans and their smells, their sounds, so they're way more shy and hiding. I wouldn't even say deer are that shy today where we live because they're everywhere. You can get, I don't know, close to 25 feet a lot of the times without spooking them.
How about other game? Other game?
Oh, that was abundant, of course. But game on the trail as we traveled was sometimes hard to find. Game at that time was shy. A large body traveling through the country necessarily made more or less disturbance, and the game would scatter into the mountains and hide away. So that sometimes we even had to employ hunters to go out to get the game for our for our own meals.
This is what I was talking about with the contrast, that they could go up to the bison and stab a bison by hand or shoot a bison with a revolver, yet the game like deer were easily spooked and would run off and hide in the mountains.
What would you say was the fertility of the soil then?
Oh, of course,
Difference between then and
necessarily in the bottoms, around through where the stream flowed through, the flat valley bottoms and the sweetwater valleys, all those western streams, the fertility seems to be very good indeed. Of course, that's all proved by the fine crop they raised when they came into production.
So again, we get another question about the fertility of the soil here, and this is kind of hard to hear him here because he's kind of mumbled, but he'll say at the very end of it that it's proved by the fertility of the soil is proved by the production that they used to get in their first crops, in their first few years of doing it. And then over time, the tilling and everything else destroyed it. I really wish I could understand more of what he was saying here.
Well, now, was there water in the streams in those days?
Oh, yes, not much. The water was not conserved then. There were dry seasons when the streams almost go dry. But, of course, at that time, early day, there's no irrigation, except in a very small way, so that they confine themselves to immediate vicinity of the water.
But there was no
They didn't
dust.
depend upon rainfall at all. They did depend for such crops as they had upon irrigation, but in a limited way.
Okay, editing here, and it's something I just caught because he's mumbling. It's a little bit hard to understanding him, but he talks about how they didn't really have irrigation except for in a limited way, and they had to do stuff. They, of course, got rain from precipitation, he said. Then he said, it's kind of cut off, and I think he's saying they were only able to get irrigation in a limited way, but clearly they did it, and they were able to get stuff to grow. So let's explore that in a future video.
That's really it from this video, but there is a lot that we can learn from history, both, like I was saying, what we can do and what not to do. And in this one, over-tilling, causing mass destruction in the soil, and then also not being regenerative in those practices like the great bison were for the West for centuries. The bison, or what I believe, the bison kept those lands pristine, especially in such huge herds. Can you imagine seeing that? And then once we got involved and started tilling it up and destroying it, causing erosion, and then tons of topsoil gone, it just became a really hard place to be able to grow. So this regenerative agriculture push has a lot of backing, especially because of times and stories like this. But if you want to listen to this entire video, head over to the channel, Life in the 1800s. It's really interesting, the rest of it, and give them the love that they deserve because they put this video together. Really grateful that they did. And stick around for the next videos in this series because we're going to be doing this every day, studying through history for homesteading. See you guys next time. See you later.